Hey guys, Paragon here. You want a build that can blast Nightmare Dungeons super fast, something to really carry you through endgame? What if I told you that with this build I've came up with, I destroyed the endgame in Nightmare Dungeons so fast that I not only farmed a Tempest Roar in one evening after hitting endgame, but I also found a Waxing Gibbous, a Battle Staff of the Crone, and these other rare uniques. With this build, I'm going to show you how I cleared the endgame so fast that it allowed me to farm a ton of uniques. And best of all, it's fun, it's easy, and it really requires no uniques. This build will easily get you started from World Tier 3 and carry you straight into World Tier 4 with no problems. Okay, so let's get started. Once I finished leveling and had hit level 45 and I unlocked World Tier 3, my ultimate goal was to create a build that I could use to transition between my starter build and into a more stable in-game build that would allow me to farm the uniques that I would need in order to unlock some of the best builds that Druid has to offer. It had to be tanky, it had to be quick, have good mobility, something with good clearing speed, and I really wanted to figure out a build that did not require a lot of resource management because I'm just not a huge fan of having to spam a builder in order to use the fun skills that I enjoy. And lastly, it had to be fun to play. After tinkering and trying a ton of different weapons, passives, I bring you my current in-game transition build that I use to blow through all the in-game content and straight into World Tier 4. It's great at clearing trash, it blasts large packs of elites, has great mobility, it has 2 sources of unstoppable, it's quite tanky, and to boot, it has almost no resource issues. So let's go over the key skills, rotations first, and then we'll talk about the gear, aspects, spirit boons, Paragon board, and finally some alternatives for the build. Starting off with passives, I had originally taken Storm Strike, Enhanced Storm Strike, and Fierce Storm Strike. But personally for me, after using this for a bit, it felt a little bad having to get so close all the time, and with the exploit glyph, which gives you vulnerable on hit for 3 seconds, I found myself killing most mobs before the vulnerable wore off anyway, so I swapped it out for Earth Spike, Enhanced Earth Spike, and Wild Earth Spike. This allowed to have more freedom of having a ranged basic attack, and it was a lot quicker too, which helped generate more spirit when I needed it to. So you can use either one you like, but for me, the Earth Spike really felt great, and with the amount of stuns and immobilize we have in this build, you'll get a lot of double hits with Earth Spike, which generates double spirits, so it's nice and it feels great. Whatever you do decide to invest into, just remember, never invest more than 1 point into a basic skill. It's just not worth it to put more than 1 point into it. For core skills, we're going to take 5 points into Pulverize, Enhanced Pulverize, and Raging Pulverize. So just remember that in order to get the free overpower every 12 seconds, you need to keep your life above the 80% threshold, which is what is considered healthy. When it drops below 80%, the timer at the bottom for the free Pulverize will stop. And since we will be getting free Pulverizes, we're going to go ahead and take Raging Pulverize for the automatic stun, which will help generate Terra motes for Landslide. For Landslide, we're also going to take 5 points into it, and then Enhanced Landslide and Primal Landslide. Primal Landslide will not only give us a great source of immobilize and stuns, but these will generate Terra motes, which make our next Landslide have a 100% chance to crit, which we will take advantage of later in the passive tree by taking some key passives to generate some extra critical strike damage. Terra motes can be stored, and you can get these quite high with the amount of times we actually stun in this build, so our Trample Landslides are basically going to always critical strike. For core passes, we're just going to take 3 points into Predatory Instincts for the 6% extra critical strike chance to close enemies, and 3 points into Iron Fur for the 9% damage reduction while in bear form. This bonus is nice because even if we have to swap out of it to generate some spirit, we'll still have the reduction for 3 seconds. On to our defensive skills, we're taking 1 point into Bulwark, 1 point into Enhanced Bulwark, and 1 point into Preserving Earth and Bulwark. This is a great source of defense. It gives us a good barrier, makes us unstoppable, but also gives us a nice chunk of Fortify, which we're going to take advantage of later when gearing to make us very tanky. For companions, we're taking 1 point into Poison Creeper, 1 point into Enhanced Poison Creeper, and 1 point into Ferocious Poison Creeper. I personally like Ferocious Poison Creeper as it extends the duration of poison by 3 seconds, and because of the neurotoxin passive, this also counts as crowd control since it slows enemies. This can allow us to not only do more damage, but provide us some defense to our build as well. If you really want a little extra offense here, you can take Brutal Poison Creeper to make your Pulverize crit more often, but remember, you'll have so many Terra motes that your Landslides will already be hitting critical strikes on every attack, so you have diminishing returns on this one. I personally took Ferocious here because my damage was already so high and I had no problems clearing through packs of mobs in Nightmare Dungeons, even 8 to 10 levels above myself. For Wrath skills, we're taking Trample, Enhanced Trample, and Savage Trample. Trample is our second source of Unstoppable, and is a source of knockback and stun, generating even more Terra motes, which gives our Landslide those juicy crits. And Savage Trample just makes it feel good, combined with our key passive. You'll often cast this at 0 spirit and end up with full spirit after 1 Landslide, making resource management much easier. For passives here, we're going to take 3 points into Crushing Earth, which is our key passive here for damage, as it gives 15% more damage multiplier to enemies who are slowed, stunned, immobilized, and knocked back. This is another reason I like Ferocious Creeper passive, as it activates this passive, and we want to have as many sources of multiplicative damage as we can get. We will also take 3 points into Safeguard for the Fortify generation when we crit with Earth skills, which is 100% with Terra mode, so we will always be at max Fortify when cruising through dungeons. And 3 points into Stone Guard for another 12% more damage multiplier when our Fortify is over 50% health, which it should almost always be at. From here, we are taking 1 point into Neurotoxin and then 3 points into Envenom. This will give us 30% additional critical strike damage while enemies are poisoned, which works super great with our Poison Creeper and our 100% crit rate with Landslide. So it's just a flat 30% more crit damage, which is a great source of multiplicative damage. For our ultimate skills, I opted to not take any here. This is what allowed me to make the build hybrid and take 5 points into Pulverize and 5 points into Landslide. Instead, we're just going to take 3 points into Defiance for another 12% damage multiplier to elites, as well as 3 points into Circle of Life and Natural Disaster. Circle of Life will basically allow all of our skills to heal us, since Pulverize will be considered an Earth skill because of the Trampled Earth aspect that we'll be using. Natural Disaster is an amazing source of damage, as it is also another source of multiplicative damage, with a 12% more damage versus vulnerable enemies, which works great with the Exploit Glyph, as well as a 12% more damage versus stun, immobilize, and knockback enemies, which is constantly happening in our build. And lastly, we will take 3 points into Resonance just for the extra 6% more damage with Nature Magic, which again is all of our skills. If you decide to use Storm Strike, you can benefit from this here as well. And for our key passive, we're taking Earth and Might. This is a great passive that you will find goes off quite a lot. It will randomly give you one of the following: Restore all spirit, and cause your attacks to have a 100% chance to crit for 5 seconds. This has a base 5% chance to go off on lucky hit, but it's further increased from critical strikes by 10% and another 10% if the enemy is stunned, for a total lucky hit chance of 25% if you crit a stun target, which is quite often. I can't tell you how many times I would be on low spirit and cast Landslide to instantly fill up my spirit gauge. There are times you can hold down Pulverize to wipe out a whole screen full of mobs and elites, and your spirit actually goes up. I will post the build guide link below. As far as skill rotations go, I like to start off combat with a Poison Creeper to inflict poison and crowd control, then trample through them, as it will knock back, stun enemies, and sets off Landslide. And because of a few aspects that we're using, Landslide will hit 6 times and will go off twice, resulting in a screen-wide effect of massive Landslide damage. This will usually fill up your spirit. For best results, try aiming besides groups of monsters and elites so you don't knock them back out of the Landslide damage area. I find it best to aim my trample slightly to the side of a monster, and this way they don't get knocked back out of it. It allows me to hit them with more of the Landslide damage. For elites and bosses, I try to aim right behind them. You will do more damage this way, as your Landslide repeats twice, but if you trample all the way across the screen, all 6 waves will have to go off before the second wave starts. And this is great for wiping out a screen full of monsters, but it's not ideal for single target. So aim those tramples slightly to the side and behind those bosses, and throw in as many pulverizes as you can. Use Bulwark when needed to become unstoppable, or combine it with Ghostwalker to give yourself a 25% boost to movement speed. I found myself rarely casting Landslide, although you can if you want to versus bosses, but make sure you're not missing your 100% overpower procs from Pulverize. And that is pretty much the skill rotation. It's pretty simple, yet it's very fun and quite enjoyable. Okay, so gearing has some flexibility, but I'll show you what I used and what I would recommend in general. Almost all of your defense comes from your chest and your legs, and some on your helm if you can get it right. I can't tell you how many times I see people playing these types of builds that are wearing something like Temerity legs and then wondering why they're taking so much damage. If done right, you can pretty much face tank the Butcher without losing any health when he's like 10 levels above you easily. For helms, I'd recommend trying to aim for cooldown reduction as high as you can, and then any defensive stat you can get to boost. Armor percent is good, max health, primary stats also, and basic attack skill speed is decent. But that last one is not very important. For chess, I actually found Insatiable Fury unique and just used that for the +2 ranks to all werebear skills, combined with +4 ranks to Pulverize on gloves. I had my Pulverize up to rank 12 pretty early, but before that I just used a rare chest with damage reduced from close and high life roll on it. But for you guys that are just planning on rolling with the rare chest, these are the stats you want to aim for: damage reduction from close enemies, damage reduction, max life, increased armor percent, and willpower. Any extra stat that helps is fine here, but I try to aim for these as a priority first. For legs, it's going to be about the same as chest. This is one of your primary defensive slots, and so you want to get damage reduction from close, damage reduction from fortified, and then try for as many of these as possible, like dodge percent while close, damage reduction from distant enemies, total armor percent, and damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned. Boosts are much simpler here. You really only need movement speed as high as possible and then some spirit cost reduction as high as possible. If you get one of those stats, then just re-roll another less important stat and try to hit the one you missed. Other good stats to look for are all stats, primary stat, as these are always a damage multiplier and a good source of DPS for any class, really. Rings are pretty straightforward. Like legs and chests is where you get your defense. Rings is kind of where you're gonna get your offense. So you really won't vulnerable on your rings no matter what. Then you want to try for stats like critical strike chance, critical strike damage with earth skills. And if you can't get any of those, just any other useful stat like max life, resource generation, or damage when close. Even if it's additive, it's still really good. For amulets, you pretty much only need two things: spirit cost reduction and cooldown reduction. So if you can find one, again, try to reroll the other one and use that. Aim for as high as you can get on both. Other great stats to look for on amulet is movement speed, and then any other stat you can find useful. There are quite a few here, both offensive and defensive. I personally used reduced damage while fortified and reduced damage from close enemies on my amulet, making me a little more tanky, and still had no issues killing stuff quickly. And lastly, for weapon, I chose a two-handed mace for the overpower damage implicit, or you could use a two-handed axe. But if you find like a staff, which is not ideal, but it has like much higher DPS and really good stats, then by all means use that instead. You want to get at least vulnerable on the weapon, or try to get vulnerable, and aim for things like critical strike damage and critical strike damage with earth skills. Other good stats are primary stat bonus for the multiplicative damage to all skills. And that's pretty much it for gear. So let's go on to aspects. The only aspect that is really required is the aspect of Trampled Earth. The rest are super good, but you can still play the build, although without the Shockwave aspect for Pulverize, it really doesn't feel as good. Aspect of Trampled Earth should definitely go on your amulet to give it the 150% value that amulets give, which buffs its damage. This aspect allows Landslide to summon 6 pillars instead of 1, so you can get those juicy full screen pillar explosions of massive damage. This glyph can only be extracted from other gear, so keep an eye out for it. Aspect of the Aftershock is another one that you have to farm and extract from other legendaries. This one is key as it doubles your damage. For me, this one was a little harder to find, and I still ran the build without it for a while, and it was okay. This aspect lets your landslide repeat, so basically the pillars come up twice, doubling the damage across the screen. It's a very nice aspect. Shockwave you're going to want to get to give your Pulverize ability to cast a shockwave that travels across the screen. It's really good at clearing large packs of trash quickly. Shockwave is also an aspect you can extract from gear only, and like the other aspects, you can start without it, although I found plenty of these while leveling myself. Always toss this on your two-hander to get the 200% buff that two-handers give, which really increases the damage of your Shockwave. So these last two aspects that I want to talk about interact really well with Pulverize. They're aspect of the Ursa Horror, which causes Pulverize to summon spikes from the ground, which is great for fighting elites, and also key here that is that it makes Pulverize an earth skill, which works great with all of our passives that give earth skills more damage. The last aspect is aspect of Quicksand, which gives all of our earth skills the ability to slow. This is great since it will pretty much give us a way to permanently have uptime on crowd control, which is why we're running Sapphire gems in our weapons. For chests, since I used Insatiable Fury, I didn't have an aspect here, but if you're using a rare chest, that's perfectly fine. I would recommend, if you want some extra defense, to maybe go for Aspect of Might, Aspect of Mending Stone, or Aspect of the Protector. These are all good choices. If you want a little extra damage, you could try Ballistic Aspect to give Earth Skills +2, which will scale both Pulverize and Landslide. Since we have two forms of Unstoppable, I would avoid Eluding Aspect here, as I don't think there is much use for it. For legs, I put on Aspect of Disobedience, which is almost mandatory in every build that you play now, just because how of insanely good armor is and how well it scales. With this and a few rolls of 10% armor increased on a couple pieces of gear, I was easily able to hit like 9 to 10,000 armor. Boots, you want Ghostwalker aspect, since we have two ways to have Unstoppable with this build. This will give us an extra boost of movement speed to really help us clear dungeons a lot faster. And lastly, I want to talk about aspect of the Umbral. I really like this aspect on a lot of classes, as it provides a ton of resource generation whenever you crowd control an enemy, and between our ability to always slow, poison, which also slows, stun, immobilize, and considering the fact that Poison Creeper also entangles and roots enemies, this aspect really puts in some work, generating quite a lot of spirit. You can find this aspect in a dungeon for the Codex of Power, but it always rolls a 1, so I recommend trying to at least get it at 3 or 4 if possible, although I did use one that had 2 power for a while. So every time I CC'd somebody, I would get 2 spirit back. I later found one that had 4, which was great, and that worked fine for me. If you can't find a good umbral, maybe consider another aspect like Crash Stone aspect, which will increase critical strike damage with earth skills for enemies that are crowd controlled. And remember, all of our earth skills slow enemies. Mangled is an option as well and can help with spirit regeneration, especially in larger groups of enemies. And lastly, Accelerate aspect is not bad to give you some extra attack speed with all of your skills. For spirit boons, I simply went wariness on the stag for the elite damage reduction. This is a staple in most builds, and it's a good choice. For eagle, I did make this my bonded spirit animal, and I took scythe talons for the increased critical strike chance, as well as avian wrath for the 30% critical strike damage. Swooping attacks is also viable here for the extra attack speed. For wolf, I just took energize to help keep spirit topped off, as I did not want to deal with the resource issues at all. And lastly, for snake, I took masochistic for the healing. Since we crit a lot, this really does some serious work. For the Paragon board, I'm not really going to go super in depth with the Paragon board here, but I will give some suggestions, as this build was not meant to push super late in-game content. It did what I intended it to do, and that was for me to push into World Tier 4 and to get my Tempest Roar and all the other Druid uniques. For the first board, you should most definitely grab Exploit as your glyph. Not only does this give extra vulnerable damage when you use it, you'll want to activate it as soon as possible. It will make every enemy you hit vulnerable for 3 seconds, and this can proc every 20 seconds. This will help in clear speed dramatically. Early on, I would try first some legendary nodes just to boost your build until later when you have more points to invest more heavily into glyphs. I personally just grabbed Survival Instincts Legendary second, and I went and picked up Ancestral Guidance third. For glyphs, just grab whatever you think you can make work. I think I got Spirit and Undaunted, but it was a bit before I got them to work. So I focused on legendary nodes while going from 50 to 70. After you unlock all of your renown and have the extra Paragon points, you can always respect these and try to get more glyphs active. So early on, I would just aim for rare nodes, legendary nodes, and anything that can help your build with minimal investment in Paragon points. And I think that pretty much covers everything for the build. I hope you guys really do enjoy this build as much as I did. And I really do hope you guys get as lucky as me and get your Tempest Roar and the other Druid uniques that you're looking for. And most of all, I really hope you have fun. If you have suggestions on how I could change or improve this build, I would love to hear them from you. If you just have questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I always try to answer any question that I can. And if you found this video helpful, then please like and subscribe. And until next time, guys, stay safe.